There's a concept in Buddhism called original enlightenment, and certainly I'm no expert on the topic, but in essence, I think it puts forward the notion that we are actually, in some sense, Buddhas in this life. But according to the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, under the term Hangaku, which in Japanese means original enlightenment, it says that this is the notion that enlightenment was a quality inherent in the minds of all sentient beings. I think there was a notion earlier on that a person, quote, may in reality be enlightened, referring to original enlightenment, but still needs to learn through a course of religious training how to act on that enlightenment, which would be actualized enlightenment. But in medieval Japan, this imported soteriological interpretation of original enlightenment was reinterpreted into an ontological affirmation of things just as they are. Enlightenment was thence viewed not as a soteriological experience, but instead as something made manifest in the lived reality of everyday life. In other words, that in some sense, we are Buddhas here and now, which obviously carries a lot of implications and a lot of potential controversy. In any case, I did a video back in 2016 on the topic of Shin Buddhism and original enlightenment, and I got a comment from one of my listeners to the effect that, "I'm not sure if this is the right video to leave this comment, so my sincerest apologies if my question is out of context with this video or simply inappropriate, but I find myself wondering, then, where does this leave the historical Buddha Siddhartha Gautama in terms of having attained full enlightenment, if it is not possible for a human being to do so?" And in the video, I must have emphasized the fact that within Shin Buddhism, particularly in those forms of Buddhism that developed in medieval or Kamakura Japan, the era of so-called Mappo, when we were so far from the historical Buddhist teaching that it was considered by many Buddhist monks and teachers that it was impossible for anybody to attain Buddhahood in this life. So he's saying, again, where does this leave the historical Buddha in terms of having attained full enlightenment if it's not possible for a human being to do so? He said, "I'm not expecting necessarily a definite answer to this, LOL, because obviously there's no way of actually going back in time to find out just how much of the stories we know of him are fact and how much is just legend, or if you like, legend designed around the idea of a teaching device, as you mentioned in this video." So I must have in the video made reference, as I often do, to skillful means as taught in the Lotus Sutra. Nevertheless, he said, "I do find myself wondering about this. One thing that does occur to me, though, being one of the things that does attract me to Shin Buddhism, that unless I'm very much mistaken, that since Siddhartha, there does not seem to, in over 2,500 years, be anyone else that I've heard of who has actually attained that kind of enlightenment." Interesting, eh? So, before parsing any kind of commentary on this comment and question, let me just share what I indicated in a formal way back in reply to this comment on my channel. I said, "If I understand your question, the notion is that it has become harder and harder to, quote, attain full enlightenment, close quote, through one's own power, since we are so far distant from the time of the historical Buddha." And that's the notion of Mappo that I've just mentioned. And here I say, in parenthesis, I say, in Japanese Buddhism, the era far distant from Shakyamuni is referred to as the age of Mappo, close parenthesis. While I suppose an orthodox Shin Buddhist view would be that no one can do so, most Buddhists would say that there have been others over the course of history, such as certain Zen masters, and perhaps there are even rare cases in the present time frame. I believe that some traditions, such as Tibetan Buddhism, advocate practices that supposedly can lead to enlightenment in this life. I myself think that it is possible to get glimpses of an enlightened or non-dual perspective, but as Shinran would say, our human greed, anger, and folly or ignorance, three poisons, are so deep-rooted that for anyone to maintain this insight and consistently actualize the Bodhisattva path in all his or her activities without any ulterior self-serving motives on a consistent basis would be phenomenally rare. I hope this provides some clarification. So, I'm basically affirming and endorsing, in terms of my own belief system, that it's virtually impossible for anybody in the present day to actually become a Buddha. The notion here is that back in the Buddhist day, when you had the direct teaching from the historical Buddha, it was much easier because you had the benefit of that teaching, that mentoring, if you will, and the role model right there in front of you. And that again, as we get further and further from that source, from the founding person within the tradition, it becomes that much more difficult to actually accomplish the ultimate attainment. Also, from another perspective, in a sense, as it gets articulated within the Mahayana scriptures, Buddhahood is in some ways for us limited beings in this particular life cycle. It's an aspirational ideal. It's a way of articulating and describing wonderful attributes that it's amazing that the human mind has the capacity to imagine, and that can serve as benchmarks or ways that we can sort of move in the direction of something more approximating that wonderful combination of attributes, namely wisdom or prajna, along with compassion or karuna. But in any case, there are some traditions within Buddhism where attaining Buddhahood in this life is the goal. And I will leave it for others to indicate, which those are in detailed form. And I admire people who strive for it because, they then become role models for the rest of it. For the rest of us, whether or not they can attain the final fulfillment or fruition of that particular path. But there again, you have the bodhisattva role, which basically, in essence, foregoes that ultimate attainment for the sake of helping beings. So it gets a little bit complicated. I do think that, we can have a glimpse of something beyond the net of greed, anger, and ignorance that so burdens us within this lifetime. But again, to have more than a glimpse, to have that experience on a consistent basis, and then to have that be the basis for action in the world is just amazingly rare. Maybe you have, I don't know, a Mother Teresa or a Krishnamurti, somebody who really embodies ultimate concern for his or her fellow beings and a full-time and active commitment in action to work at helping others. But boy, that's very rare. Which is not to say that there are many people who don't do good things. And, that has to be acknowledged and praised and appreciated, which it certainly is by the recipients of those kinds of, charitable acts. But, to some extent, from a Shin Buddhist perspective, a person also needs to look at what their underlying motives are. What is the intent? Is the intent truly and purely to act in a Buddhistic or Buddha kind of manner or a Bodhisattva kind of manner? Or are there sort of underlying motivations such as for recognition or some benefit to the self? But again, if the self is an illusion, to recognize that and to be in that first stage of bodhisattvahood of dana or charity or giving, and that being done in a way consistent with the Diamond Sutra, saying that there's neither a giver or a receiver of the gift or a gift itself. To have that insight, which is associated with Buddhahood, again is just extraordinary in terms of anybody being able to do it in this life that we have now. As a Shin Buddhist, we believe, as I think those of you who watch my channel know, that we can attain Buddhahood, but it's in the next life subsequent to our rebirth in the Pure Land when we can come back and fulfill the sort of the compassionate impulses that we might have, but that are unable to be manifested in their fullness as a result of our limited capabilities and our more negative characteristics as far as greed, anger, and the ignorance that plagues us like clouds that block the sun. Namo Amida Butch. Namo Amida Butch. Namo Amida Butch.